Okay, we are recording now. So this is the Boston SABR chapter. This is, I think, our second full Zoom meeting. The first one was with Louis Tiant as a special guest and Saul helping present him. I am going to turn this over to Saul Wisnia now, who will introduce our guest for this evening. And Curt's going to talk for about 20 or 25 minutes. Then we will have a break and we'll go directly to questions and answers. You can put questions into the chat. With this many people, that might be a good idea. I'll try to read them out of the chat when we get to that part of it, but we also may just let people get on and talk as well. We'll kind of play that by ear. But let's just start. And if you don't want to be recorded, you should not say anything or leave because we are recording now. And Saul, why don't you take it away?
All right, thanks, Bill. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We have a great guest tonight. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his name and his work. Curt Smith is a longtime SABR member. Do you remember what year you joined, Curt?
No, I don't. I try to keep the memories and anniversaries and things like that to a minimum.
All right.
For
Long time. We'll just say long time.
Probably all of us understand.
All right.
Hey, Saul, Joanne just joined.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll just say that before we continue with Curt's intro, we'll skip over because we have a tradition we started of having Joanne Hulbert, our chapter co-chair, read either a poem of her own or a great poem from the past as our poet laureate of the Boston chapter to start off each meeting. So Joanne, if you would care to take the dais. She's on mute. You're on mute, Joanne. I did hear her briefly.
I did hear her too.
Yeah.
Mute there.
There you go. All right.
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't know. Too many buttons. Anyway, yes, I did. I did a huge search in order to find anything that might be connected with a president. So, and this took a lot. And this is from the Chicago Daily Tribune of November 29th, 1908, page B4, by Clarence Patrick MacDonald, who wrote a lot of baseball poetry that was in the Tribune between 1900 and 1920 and around there. Also wrote a lot of music and all sorts of stuff like that. Anyway, here it is. Title of the poem is Soon Forgotten. His name is seldom spoken now, though once it was a household word. And when you think of him somehow, your blood by memories is not stirred. You don't recall his whirlwind plays, both heady and magnificent. He played great baseball in the days when Harrison was president. You don't recall the way he had the pitchers soaring in the air. He put the foe all to the bat and had them going up for fair. You don't remember all the praise, the flattery upon him spent. He was a hero in the days when Harrison was president. He was a hero, that's the name, an idol in the public eye who won his way to fickle fame, a flitting flame that soon would die. He once was fandom's greatest craze, this young, old, long forgotten gent who was a player in the days when Harrison was president. All right, now the thing is though, which Harrison?
Well, it's gotta be
Benjamin.
Benjamin.
Yeah, right.
1889 to 1893.
Very good.
How about William Henry Harrison, 1841 for 30 days?
He was only president from March.
Yeah, it can't be him. They didn't have baseball then.
They didn't have. They may have had baseball, but they didn't have fandom.
Right.
oh, you are really splitting hairs.
Maybe it was a Brooklyn Excelsiors game.
He was only president during spring training anyway.
But isn't it conjuring up more nostalgia?
That was awesome. Yeah.
Now I do have just one other little blurb that while I was doing this search through hither and yon, but I found this other just slight little factoid that I found. It's just a couple of lines. And this is from April 14th of 1909. And this is from the Concord, Massachusetts Enterprise, of all places. And it said, President William H. Taft and Vice President J.S. Sherman have received complimentary passes from the Washington Baseball Club. President Taft was not aware before that Washington was in the American League. He knew, however, that the club, the 9, was a tail ender. When he intimated this to Thomas C. Noyes, the head of the club, the latter said that they hoped for better things in the future.
Wow. That's great. And wasn't that right around the time that a gentleman named Walter Johnson joined the team?
Hey,
So
yeah.
things were picking up already. I think
Yeah.
he had an incredible record in front of presidents. I was friendly with his son and helped him a little bit with a book that he wrote, which is, by the way, is an exceptional grandson, which is an exceptional book, by the way. Walter Johnson, Baseball's Big Train. And I think it won a SABR award. And he said he had all these balls signed by different presidents, about 8 different presidents, and they were stolen. And somehow the Hall of Fame got him back for him. But anyway,
Wow.
we digress.
Wow.
But
Oh, wow. That's
yeah, and he was actually a I think he was in the Maryland. He was a Maryland district rep or something. He ran for Congress and lost.
Yeah.
But very, very popular guy. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Joanne. That was wonderful.
Okay. So, and then we can save to the end the debut of the Timothy H. Murnane bat. We can do that later.
Oh, something to look forward to. All right.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
All right. So we'll get back to introducing our guest speaker tonight. So a longtime SABR member. We don't know exactly how long, but we know it's long. And Curt Smith, one of his claims to fame is that he wrote more speeches than anyone else for another president, George H.W. Bush.
HW. Okay, great.
And he's also considered, according to USA Today, the voice of authority on baseball broadcasting. And we have one baseball broadcaster here with us tonight who could probably attest to that. Many SABR members may be familiar with his classic history of baseball broadcasting, Voices of the Game. It's on my shelf. I'm sure many of yours.
Mine too. Yep.
Among his nearly 20 books are also Mercy, a celebration of Fenway Park's centennial, and Pull Up a Chair, the Vin Scully story. His most recent book was The Presidents and the Pastime, a history of baseball and the White House. Curt is also now a senior lecturer of English at the University of Rochester, and above all, you may not know, a lifetime Red Sox fan. Who knows that Franklin Roosevelt made his last ever campaign speech on a cold, rainy November night at Fenway Park in 1944. So with no more ado, we welcome Curt Smith, who is on mute.
Here we are.
Speak, Curt.
Still on mute. Just touch the little microphone thingy. See the little microphone there? Nope, can't hear it yet. Sorry. Get your able assistant.
Bill, if you're the host, can't you unmute him?
I was trying to do that, but it doesn't work.
Oh, okay.
Well, while we're waiting, oh, nope, somebody's coming back. I was going to say we could do the Tim Murnane bat now.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I got it right here. Shall we do the little song?
Well, he's still on mute, so.
Yeah, okay. Well,
But he's working on it.
He is working on it. Here comes the able assistant. All right, take it away, Curt.
How's that?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Great.
good.
Great.
Thanks
As
for
quick
the
as
help.
Dick Raddatz coming out of the bullpen to snuff a rally. Well, I want to thank Saul for that very kind introduction, and Bill Nowlin, without whom SABR would not be SABR. Joe Castiglione, he and I, talking about the years, go back to I think the very first year that he joined the Sox in 1983, or it was within several years thereafter. He is a terrific, as you know, broadcaster, the voice of baseball in New England. He is an even more terrific human being, as all of you who know him would admit. And someday, as I speak as a member, this is of course unofficially and only my own view, I'm a member of the Ford C. Frick Committee in Cooperstown, which votes on who each year shall be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And with Joe Castiglione, at least from this corner, the question is not if, but when, and it can't come soon enough. He, the great late Ned Martin, Ken Coleman, you can start right there. They all belong in Cooperstown and they're not there today. So we'll see what we can do about that. And you realize there's only one Red Sox broadcaster who's in the broadcast wing of the Hall of Fame. That's Curt Gowdy. John Miller's there, but Baltimore and San Francisco claim him as their own. One broadcaster from the greatest baseball region in the country. There's slightly something amiss.
Thank you, Curt. You're very kind.
Well, you're very welcome. It's very true. My thanks for the chance to be with you tonight and get this going here. Hang on just a moment. Particularly on this annual Martin Luther King Day meeting, when I know that it's rather frenetic and we have things to do, particularly trying to catch up for 8 or 9 or 10 months of the pandemic. One reason that I've been a Red Sox fan since youth, my mother was born not far from Boston, and I inherited her Old Town team DNA. Almost every summer when I was a kid, I look back very fondly on this, our dad would drive our family from upstate New York, where we lived, to Worcester, where my grandmother lived. And we'd do things that she could not or would not do, paint her house, mow the lawn, do other household chores. In return, as a reward, Dad then drove us the 40 miles from Worcester to Fenway Park, where we'd see a midweek afternoon game. As we were talking before these remarks began, this was in the early 1960s, when the Red Sox were so bad, horrific is a better word, true story, you could drive up to Fenway Park, park on an adjacent street, go to the ticket booth and get a seat, a box seat, 10 minutes before a game. It's been a while since then, but why not? Dick Stewart, Dr. Strangeglove, played first base, once getting a standing ovation at Fenway Park for picking up a hot dog wrapper without dropping it. Ned Martin swears that that's true, and who is to doubt him? Not to mention, as we were mentioning, franchise's other symbol of futility, shortstop Don Budden. Sports Illustrated once said it best. They wrote that when Budden and second baseman Pumpsy Green completed a double play, air raid horns went off all over New England. What a team, but what great broadcaster to describe those teams. Curt Gowdy, the Wyoming Cowboy. Ken Coleman, forever the voice of the greatest pennant race of all time. The miracle, unforgettable, franchise-changing 1961 Red Sox. And as I mentioned, Ned Martin, who once said of the Sox, quoting Shakespeare, "When sorrows come, they come not as single spies, but in battalions." God bless them all. They all belong in Cooperstown. Again, my thanks. When I'm finished with these remarks, I'd welcome questions and anything you have to ask. Sports, politics, life, the pandemic, we're discussing them all. We meet 2 days before a presidential inaugural to discuss, as the title of my most recent book suggests, The Presidents and the Pastime, the history of baseball and the White House. It's a book that explores the link between two institutions, the presidency and baseball, our national office and our national game. And only in America, twinning of the heart. Our link to baseball begins, well, about as far back as you can in these United States, before there were United States, before there was a presidency, to the winter of 1777-78 at Valley Forge, where the future father of our country played rounders, a form of baseball imported from Britain, our mother country. Then General George Washington played catch with his aide-de-camp for hours. How did he have time to win a revolution? By 1860, freedom won, but civil war ahead. Friends of Abraham Lincoln arrived in Springfield, Illinois during a town baseball game to tell Abe that he had enough votes to become the Republican nominee for president. He said, "I'm glad to hear they're coming, but they'll have to wait a few minutes for me to have another turn at bat." That's an attributed quote. Talk about a president to be with his priorities in order. Such stories evoke Lincoln's humanity. Successor Andrew Johnson seemed to believe in baseball's supremacy, giving government clerks and employees time off to watch it. Late 19th century presidents, and we just talked about those several moments ago, linked the sport from the inimitable Grover Cleveland, not Alexander, simply Grover Cleveland, to William McKinley. Then came the only president who despised the pastime, except that he could not say a word. In 1901, Theodore Roosevelt became president when McKinley was assassinated. TR had or would explore the Amazon, kill big game, and charge up San Juan Hill. Nothing defeated him, but baseball. He hated it. Baseball was too gentle, no blood, no gore. It was also enormously popular. If Roosevelt wished to remain president, as he did, he had to keep loathing to himself, as he did. By contrast, baseball meant all to his successor, and we mentioned him several moments ago. Those of you who are about my age will remember a television show from the 1960s, the Jackie Gleason Show. And one of the grand characters that Gleason played, Reginald Van Gleason III, the top hat, the mustache, the 300 pounds. He performed and he waltzed like someone half that weight. In the 1880s, amateur pitcher William Howard Taft yearned from the major leagues. He settled for being president. In 1909, he watched his first big league game interrupted by cheering, read the Washington Post, as the crowd recognized the president. After all, at 300 pounds, Taft was hard to miss. In 1910, he threw out the first pitch, first president to toss the opening day official ball in the Capitol. It was thrown out by Walter Johnson, we just mentioned several months ago. A rite of spring he began. Taft was conservative, Republican, and round as a curveball. Successor Woodrow Wilson was a liberal, a Democrat, and as thin as a rail. Baseball was their tie. In 1919, in his second term, Wilson brooked a serious stroke on his left side. What saved him then, and after leaving office, were wife Edith, and not to seem hyperbolic, baseball. As a boy, he'd hand-scribbled a diagram of a baseball diamond in his notebook. Now, each day, a limo took the semi-recluse Wilson from the White House to Griffith Stadium, home of the even then sainted Washington Senators, where it parked in the home bullpen, had the top opened, and where Wilson watched every game. On each side of the car stood Secret Service agents to protect him against foul balls. He was succeeded by three presidents, a quick story on each. Warren Harding, president 1921 through 3, loved baseball. He even owned a team in the Ohio State League. Even more, he loved to drink bourbon in the Oval Office with Babe Ruth whenever the Yankees came to Washington. What made this interesting is that at this very time, Harding was an ardent public sponsor of prohibition, blasting booze whenever he got a chance. Ah, hypocrisy, they name is politics. Calvin Coolidge was surely our most reticent president. A woman came up to him and said, "Mr. President, I bet someone $20 I could get you to say more than 2 words. Coolidge eyed her and said, "You lose." Coolidge was succeeded by Herbert Hoover, who truly loved the game. Babe Ruth, however, had no use for him. The Babe was once criticized for having a greater salary than Hoover. "I know," Ruth said, "but I had a better year than he did." Rather difficult to argue with that discernment even now. We come now to Franklin Roosevelt. On the cover of my book, and who talked about baseball as no president had, 2 months after his 1933 inaugural, FDR gave a fireside chat, his first fireside chat, a radio speech. He said, "I have no expectation of making a hit every time I come to bat. What I seek is the highest possible batting average, not only for myself, but for the team." Elected to a third term in 1940, and it was a close election, which is why that Roosevelt spoke in Boston that year and also at Fenway Park in 1944. but elected to that third term, Roosevelt then faced the need to make his biggest hit of all. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, organized baseball had grave doubt as to whether it could or should exist in 1942 or ever again. That January, Baseball Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis wrote FDR, "I venture to ask what you have as to whether professional baseball should continue to operate." The very next day, Roosevelt read his reply aloud at a nationwide press conference in which became called the Green Light Letter, saying, "I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Freeze this time. Baseball fused the home front." And as Fiorello LaGuardia wrote, "The one great tie with home for troops abroad, aside from family letters, is baseball scores. The game so dominant that when other sports asked for like support, FDR wisely ignored them or refused them. The priority was the war. Baseball could help win it." On April 12, 1945, World War II almost over, Roosevelt suffered a cerebral hemorrhage at his vacation home in Georgia. In 1946, successor Harry Truman commenced the season by throwing out the first ball for the first time since before America had joined the war. Harry threw the opening ball, one year right-handed, one year left-handed, another with both arms cupping the same pitch. Yogi Berra would call him amphibious, and did. In coming years, the real fan in the family, Harry said, was wife Bess, God bless her, regularly watching baseball on TV and hearing radio on the aptly named second floor Truman balcony. There she heard Senator's announcer, the late great Bob Wolf, call a team so bad that he is alleged to have omitted ever saying who was ahead. "I didn't need to," he said. "People tuning in heard me just give the score. 5-3, 10-5, 4-2. They already knew who was winning, and it wasn't the Senators." Once Truman vowed, pricelessly, timelessly, "May the sun never set on American baseball." It did not under successor Dwight Eisenhower. Ike liked baseball's camaraderie. About this time, he said, "As a boy, I wanted to be a real Major League Baseball player. My friend said that he'd like to be president of the United States. Neither of us got our wish." Ike left office as our then oldest president at 70. John F. Kennedy was its youngest, elected at 43. Under Ike, baseball's titan had been the Yankees' Mickey Mantle. The 1950s, in essence, belonged to him, certainly to his team. Mick was 4 decades Ike's junior. Think of that. By contrast, Kennedy's tie was to a player almost as old as he was. In 1960, JFK, then 42, was running for president when he approached the Cardinal Stan Musial, a youthful 39, and said, "They tell me you're too old to play baseball and I'm too young to be president, but maybe we'll fool them." They did. Kennedy was elected in 1960. In 1962, Musial was named to the National League team for the All-Star game in Washington. Kennedy was delighted to see Stan, who recalled in 1960 said, "Mr. President, I guess we fooled him." In the wake of Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon Johnson became president, rarely noting baseball, since politics was his only interest, period. In 1968, as some of us recall, LBJ declined to run for re-election. His successor was likely the greatest baseball student to ever become president. In 1965, then private citizen Richard Nixon was offered 2 baseball posts by the game itself, director of the Players Union, then commissioner. Declining, he became baseball in 1969 and hosted an all-star gala at the White House to hail baseball's centennial anniversary. In 1972, at a press conference, President Nixon was asked if he would be willing to name the all-time baseball team. Was he? As modern era American League manager, Nixon named the master linguist Casey Stengel, inventor of the convoluted language Stengelese. Later, Nixon said, "The essence of diplomacy is to confuse the opposition." The opposition never knew what Casey was talking about. Casey always knew. "If I had it to do over again," Nixon said, "I'd name Casey Stengel Secretary of State." The very thought still staggers. To Nixon, baseball meant the pastime. To successor Gerald Ford, it meant his Detroit Tigers future Hall of Famer, Al Kaline, number 6, right field. Ford retired in 1977, beaten narrowly a year earlier by Jimmy Carter, who forged a softball team of friends and Secret Service agents. This led to a rumor that Carter disliked baseball, an absurdity mocking his family's past. Each year when Carter had been growing up, each year when the peanut farm load lightened in Georgia, his parents, Miss Lillian and James Sr., would quote unquote drive up north to spend up to 10 or more days immersed in big league baseball, to see the world, as Carter said, traveling to a different city each year. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, different city each year. One year, the Carters would drive to Chicago, stay at a hotel, and see an entire Cubs homestand. The next, they might come to Boston, stay in a hotel, see an entire Red Sox homestand. 3 years from then, see a Braves homestand. 1 year, if they were desperate, they go to New York and see the Yankees. It was a baseball lover's dream. Like Carter, his successor Ronald Reagan embodied the American dream. Nicknamed Dutch by his father for his chubby countenance, Reagan began by broadcasting the 1930 Chicago Cubs over radio station WHO Des Moines, the only one of 4 outlets there doing their games, not to broadcast them live. Rather, a wire operator sent code from Chicago's Wrigley Field to Reagan's studio in Iowa. All Dutch saw was B2O. What does it mean? All of you know, ball 2 outside. What about S1S? Strike 1 swinging. He then invented, recreated games he never saw. One day, the wire broke from Wrigley. Reagan knew that if the studio put on transcribed music, people, he said, would turn to another station doing the game live. Instantly, he recalled the one thing not to make the box score: foul balls. You can hit 2 million foul balls and still have 2 strikes. So for the next 7 minutes, he had the batter set a world record for fouls. Foul this way, foul that way, foul this way, all back, over me, back, anywhere you can think of. None of this happened, but on radio, who knew? Reagan once said, merging fact and myth, what better training than politics? Well, finally, this day, the wire revived after 7 minutes of Reagan embellishment. It read, batter popped out on first ball pitched. George H.W. Bush, for whom I was privileged to write during and after his presidency, followed, having played the game, captained his team at Yale, and later coached. At our first speech meeting in the White House, he told me, I'd rather quote Yogi Berra than Thomas Jefferson, which sounds good to me. Then I learned that Bush knew more Berrisms than I did. Aptly, a friendship born in World War II linked Bush, the Navy's youngest aviator, to another Hall of Famer, Ted Williams, altogether now the greatest hitter who ever lived. In 1991, Bush, the 41st president, set about to hail Ted's and Joe DiMaggio's magic 1941, when Ted had become the last man to hit 400 and DiMaggio forged his record 56-game hitting streak. I was to write Bush's speech and text for each President's Award. Chief of Staff John Sununu told me. President's Award, I said, puzzled, when was it last given? Never, Sununu said, nor has it been given since. Bush simply made up the trophy and gave it to them in the Rose Garden. That July, I joined others in the garden of the White House to laud the greatest generation. Bush, Ted, and DiMaggio spoke. Williams incidentally dominated the event, not because he wished to, but because he defined presence. Then took Air Force One to a quote unquote summit in Toronto with the Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, arranged conveniently so that they all could see that night's All-Star game there in Toronto. The idea, Bush said, was that we'd have them to ourselves on the plane, the Splendid Splitter and the Yankee Clipper, for an hour and a half and hear them talk. 2 legends telling baseball tales. Sitting on the plane, Bush thought of baseball, he told me, when he was young. His successor, Bill Clinton, had learned the game in youth over the radio. The Cardinals' Harry Carey saying of a home run, holy cow, it might be, It could be. It is. Raised in rural Arkansas, Clinton returned home after college to enter politics and marry Hillary Rodham, a Cubs fan, the Cardinals' ancient rival. Clinton was elected president in 1992. 3 years later, he attended the game in which Cal Ripken passed Lou Gehrig's consecutive games played streak. Clinton was sitting next to Orioles announcer John Miller in the booth when Ripken homered in that game. John started calling it, but the president, with his own mic, begins yelling, "Go, go, yes, out of here." Well, what did Miller do? What could he do? He couldn't grab Clinton's mic, so he became background music, as he says, in voice almost disembodied. For John, at first miffed, reason prevailed. I got to thinking, Miller, an admirer of the 42nd president, I can now put on my resume, worked with President Bill Clinton, a very close friend. Clinton left office in January 2001. That September 11, terrorists seized and crashed, as we remember, 4 planes, including 2 that destroyed New York's Twin Towers, killing almost 3,000 Americans. On October 30th, George W. Bush was to throw out the first ball before Game 3 of the World Series at Yankee Stadium. The first president, incidentally and amazingly, given the Yankees' proclivity in November, the first time ever that an American president had attended a World Series game at the big ballpark in the Bronx. That night, 9/11 still ran raw. Bush met a roaring ovation as he left the Yankees dugout, passed the first base line, and approached the mound. He then readied to throw to a catcher behind the plate, difficult as any practitioner of the art knows. Add the fury in every seat, in every tier, in every living room of Americans watching at home, the emotion overwhelmed. Bush wound up and threw a strike to the Yankees catcher as if the ball had been placed in his mitt. The crowd exploded, its cry for primal justice piercing the cool fall air. Slowly, Bush left the field. Gary Cooper in high noon, a hero more than he ever had been or ever would be again, having fired America's signpost to the world. 4 years later, Bush was succeeded by Barack Obama. In 2014, Obama became the first president in office to visit Cooperstown since the sainted Martin Van Buren in 1839, and first in office to enter baseball's shrine since its birth in 1939. From Obama, 2 baseball themes emerged. The first theme was of Jackie Robinson's breaking baseball's color line in 1947, integrating the game and crucial to integrating America. Obama proudly wore that cloak throughout. A second theme was loyalty, his knowledge that Chicago Southsiders love their White Sox. In 2010, the hometown Washington Nationals expected Obama to wear their cap while throwing the first pitch at Nationals Park in Washington. Instead, he hid a White Sox cap in his glove, whipped it out when he reached the mound and set the throw, put on a Chicago cap, and arced his first pitch, impressing even a Republican. In 2017, he was succeeded by the former senior captain and star first baseman of the New York Military Academy baseball team. As a hitter, said a mate, Donald Trump had, quote unquote, wanted to overpower people. To Rolling Stone magazine, Coach Ted DiBiase said, "We had Phillies and Red Sox scouts to watch him. They hoped to sign him, but he wanted to go to college. He didn't want to make baseball money," Trump said. He wanted to make real money, and real money he did. Too bad, it would have been a show. Trace that in 2016 made Trump lured early on. Yet loving baseball, why did he skip DC's 2017 through 20 presidential opening day, having thrown out the first pitch elsewhere before becoming president at Yankee Stadium, at Wrigley Field, and yes, at Fenway Park? My guess is that Trump, had he been introduced as president in overwhelmingly Democratic Washington, where he got all 4% of the vote in 2016, he would have been booed. In my view, Trump should have revised his act, throwing out the first pitch, as baseball should act to thrive in the wider culture. Baseball must do what Franklin Roosevelt urged in a speech he was writing when he died. Move forward, he said, with strong and active faith, so that years from now, an American child will feel as we have the true meaning of those two lyric words, play ball. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. Thanks, Kurt. And I think, Bill, we're going to go right into
Yeah,
questions.
we do have a
So-
few questions.
Yes.
Maybe go in reverse order. Neil, why don't you speak up, maybe unmute and ask your question yourself? How about you, Neil?
Okay, sure. It's a really simple question. Is Joe Biden a Phillies fan?
I don't know. What's interesting, the question was, is Joe Biden a Phillies fan? We have done crack research, more or less, over the last several weeks trying to ascertain, since the season doesn't open allegedly until April. There's time to find out. He apparently has a football background. Someone told me that he was a
Right,
defensive
yeah,
back.
All-State high school
All-State, yes.
end. Great
Yes,
receiver.
okay, so he's quick. He better be. And is in terms of baseball proclivity, I don't know. I really have read very little, and there's very little to read. But I can bet you one thing, that he'll be at Nationals Park on the opening day of the 2021 season, assuming that there is such a season. It's a wonderful public relations forum. As I said, and I was very critical about this publicly over the last year and a half, as to why Trump had not thrown out the first ball. By process of elimination, it comes down to he feels he would be booed and he has a very thin skin. Reagan was booed. Reagan smiled, went out to the pitcher's mound and threw a pitch. Bush, 41, was booed ceaselessly, especially when the economy tanked in 1991 and 2. He still went out to the mound. George W. Bush, with the exception of one night, and a golden night it was in October 1991, was booed as well, or 2001 rather. So it comes to the territory. The White House is in Washington. Washington doesn't like Republicans. Man up, learn to live with it. Put on your Nationals cap and jacket and go to the mound. I think Trump would have gained a great deal more by doing that than he would coming up with lame explanations, as did his office, as to why he wasn't there.
Dr. Fauci did it. What a pitch.
Yes, it was.
Well, I hope he's a better scientist than he
He'd have
is.
been all right on a sub-little league level, you know, wouldn't have had a chance to hook as much by then.
He'll never do it again.
He will never do it again, quite correct. But he gets points for trying gamely to do so.
Bill, can I just jump in about the question?
Yeah.
Years ago on Saturday Night Live, there was a skit, and apparently Biden had a gaffe as the vice president. And I'll try to find it. The skit shows Biden in his bedroom with a giant poster. I don't know, it was either Chase Utley or Mike Schmidt in his bedroom. So I don't know if he's a Phillies fan, but they surely built that up during the skit.
Right.
Yeah, great.
If he were a Philly fan, at least in the last few years, it would be a Philly fanatic, as he was the greatest gate attraction they had.
Well,
Donna, do you have a postscript to that?
We do have a couple other questions. Actually, Donna has one of the questions herself.
Donna, you're on mute.
Donna Halper.
Still on mute, Donna.
I'm sorry. According to the sports writers at the Philadelphia Inquirer, including several that I know, and I'm not trying to name drop it, just I was working on a piece about a week ago and I had to talk to some folks at the Inquirer and I asked them, not about Biden specifically, but anyway, it came up in conversation. They said, yeah, he and his wife are both loyal Phillies fans. In fact, he has a shirt with his name on it, a Phillies shirt. He goes as often as he can. And yeah, he evidently is a Phillies fan, and I can point you in the direction of the reporters who reported that as recently as 2 weeks ago.
Well, he'll have the number
Jack McCarthy
46.
just posted that to the, it's in the chat. You can see a link to the US
You
News.
made Mark Cantor very happy. He's our resident Phillies fan.
Me
And I'll
too.
be happy to
And Neil too.
give you, I'll put a link in the chat to the
And
most
B,
article I have about that.
Oh, yeah.
Want me to also ask my question?
Yes.
Okay. So I had read that Calvin Coolidge hated baseball, and that as the chief executive, he felt a duty to show up. So he showed up for a couple of games, but he always left after the second inning. Now, I don't know if there's any truth to that at all. Have you read or heard anything about Calvin Coolidge's relationship with baseball?
oh, yeah.
His wife was the fan.
Yeah.
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 So that's
and,
not a myth, that is for real.
Yeah, in the presidents of the pastime, we explore every president's relationship to baseball, and Coolidge was no exception. I don't think it's fair to say that he hated baseball. He was a baseball know-nothing. He knew, he couldn't tell you the difference between a sacrifice bunt and a Baltimore chop. What was the saving grace for Coolidge? Not simply socially, but politically in the 1924 election. An advertising guru, or at least a political associate on the Republican side, was faced with the task of humanizing and warming up Calvin Coolidge, not the easiest trip in the Yukon. And they came up with the idea that, well, geez, if it were to be rumored and written and heard about that Calvin Coolidge liked baseball, certainly this would be a way, in essence, to link him to the average man. He was the beneficiary of great timing. 1924, the year of the presidential election, happened to be, of course, the year in which the Washington Senators won the American League pennant and then won the World Series. And the Republican image merchants spread the rumor that Calvin Coolidge was a passionate admirer of baseball, an exponent of the national game, which is certainly something that he'd been able to hide very successfully for almost all of his life. Coolidge's ace in the hole was his wife, Grace, who was not simply a neutral advocate of baseball, but a passionate fan. She had been, I'm trying to think, it was a college in New England, might have been Dartmouth, that when she was in college, she'd been the official scorer at every college baseball game. She followed the game intently. And in fact, after Coolidge had died, he died in the 1930s. She died, I think, in 1957, and was a very frequent visitor to Fenway Park. There are pictures of Grace Coolidge and maybe with Don Budden, certainly with Ted Williams from the 50s. And this enabled Coolidge to portray this utterly fictive storyline that he loved baseball. All of a sudden, in the summer of 1924, you can see Coolidge's speeches shift. He never talked about anything social, certainly baseball, but all of a sudden, he's talking about the Washington Senators as America's armed exponents of the knight and ball, armed knights, I think he called them, of the ball and glove. When the Senators clinched the pennant in Boston in 1924, the train brought them back to Union Station. They had a ticker tape parade that took them from there to the White House, where Coolidge gave for him a rabble-rousing speech talking about his love of the game, about how he was attuned to baseball, how it showed that his administration was attuned to the average American. I mean, it's utterly preposterous, but as in so many things with politics, it worked. He won a landslide victory. His opponent, the Democratic opponent, I think won the only state outside of the South that the Democrats won was actually not a state they won, but rather in Washington, in Wisconsin rather, where the third party candidate, Senator La Follette, won. So baseball played an enormous role, outsized role in the 1924 election and in the first Coolidge term. But feeling he had it made, he shunted it to the back pages for his second term. He didn't follow and love baseball nearly as much as someone who was much more hapless politically, and that, of course, was Herbert Hoover.
We've got a couple other questions, actually, both about first pitches. Father Humbert Kilanowski, would you like to ask yours?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. So to build on Curt, what you said about President George W. Bush at his first pitch at the 2001 World Series, is there any other instance of a sitting president throwing a strike from the pitcher's mound? Because it sounds like something Teddy Roosevelt could have done, but if he said he hated the game, then he probably wouldn't have done it.
Well, not that I've ever seen any evidence, and I feel fairly safe in saying no, there's never been an American president who has thrown a strike from the mound when he was in office. First of all, we would be acquainted with it. But secondly, keep in mind that all the way through Richard Nixon, I think, and maybe even Gerald Ford, American presidents didn't throw the first pitch from the mound. They didn't throw it even to a catcher or to a third baseman or to an outfielder or anywhere. From their first base box, they would get in their first base box and the players en masse would be collected maybe 30, 35, 40 feet away from them. And at the president's wish, he would get the ball and he would wind up and fire the ball as long as he could, way above the heads of the crowding mass. So what you had was the president trying to show how far he could throw the ball. I think it's generally conceded that John F. Kennedy may have set a record here. Kennedy liked the game, was not a passionate fan of it, but certainly was athletic. And he showed it in throwing out the first pitch. He threw it way over the mass of players. And then they would race to it. And whoever got to the ball first would basically have it in his private possession, and he could take it to the president right then, in fact, before the game began, and have the president autograph it. Well, one year during the era that Dwight Eisenhower was president, so there were 8 opening days of which he was a part. During almost, in fact, I think all of those, the Washington Senators and the rival team playing the Senators that day at Griffith Stadium, they'd be clustered into mass. Well, one day, Jimmy Pearsall, at that time, was an outfielder for the Senators, and I think all of us are well acquainted with his checkered career. So Eisenhower winds up, fires the ball. As he does, all of the other players begin to scamper toward it. Pearsall scampers toward Dwight Eisenhower. He takes out his own baseball. He presents it to the president and said, "Mr. President, would you sign it? Those idiots are out scampering for another ball altogether." So,
Bob, did that answer your question, Bob Russo?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Curt.
yeah, so it would be almost impossible since presidents began really with Ford, but particularly with Reagan, taking their first balls to the field, and they would be on the field and they would throw it to a catcher or to a third baseman. Reagan had a fine arm, was a great athlete, came from an athletic background, and I feel safe in saying he never threw a strike from the mound because, as you may remember, when he would helicopter from Washington to Baltimore, and he is the one, incidentally, I think most responsible for preserving baseball interest in DC in those long, dark days when they didn't have a team. But Reagan would throw a strike, but it might be along the sideline, maybe 30 feet away from Rick Dempsey, which is hardly the same as throwing it from the pitcher's mound to home plate. So I think in this case, Bush 43, Bush Jr., as some of us call him, I think would hold the mark. It was a great moment, a profile in courage. Only people who have done that know how difficult it can be, and to do it under the glare of scrutiny, basically representing his nation, was an astounding feat.
Seamus,
he himself said he felt, I'm sorry, he himself felt he felt more pressured throwing out the ball than he did meeting with any foreign dignitary.
Can I just add one quick thing? Warren G. Harding, who of course owned, I think, a minor league team or something, the newspapers of his day always said he had great stuff. Now, I have no idea if he threw a strike to the mound, but I have tons of articles about him. I mean, he may have been the most corrupt president of his day, but they all said, wow, what a great arm, what great stuff, and really learned from owning a minor league franchise.
Well, if he wasn't the most corrupt, as Dizzy Dean would say, he was amongst them. And I think the fact that he would be out championing prohibition while he was getting smashed with Babe Ruth in the Oval Office rather speaks to a very lazy press, and one was that was in his pocket, and secondly to the lack of character that Harding had. But he did love the game, and he owed, as you suggest, a team in the Ohio State League, which has variously been described as a minor league, low minor league, or very high instructional league. I don't know, but he, in fact, during the campaign of 1920. His great moments that he enjoyed the most were not talking to political correspondents, but talking to baseball writers. And writers, particularly from the Brooklyn Eagle, were very close with him. So it's too bad that he hadn't become commissioner. He might have been a better commissioner than we had, and certainly we would have had a better president.
I'd say the same thing about Nixon. Maybe he should have been commissioner. Instead of
Well,
becoming
he should
president.
have been a great commissioner, of course, in foreign policy. I would suggest he was a great foreign
No,
policy.
he did great things in China. Absolutely.
Yeah, but certainly, I mean, he was a terrible athlete. Anyone who has ever seen him try to golf will understand that. But he loved baseball. In fact, at the 1949 All-Star game at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, Casey Stengel was there as the American League manager, having won the year before with the Yankees. And Nixon, who was to give the keynote speech that night, and he and Stengel went out drinking. Went out, I say, they drank at the press club. And Stengel is quoted as saying after 2 hours that he had to get out of there before, quote unquote, that boy makes me a Republican. Stengel was a great Democrat, and he was impressed, as were people even who didn't like Nixon, sports writers and other commentators, as to his stunning scholarship and understanding of American sport, not simply baseball, but of course, football as well. There were other sports he considered too frilly, but those two he really liked and he really knew.
Curt, Seamus Kearney had a question. Did you ever meet another SABR member and presidential speechwriter, Guy Waterman?
No, that's a terrific question, and no, I never have.
He was a speechwriter. He was a speechwriter for Gerald Ford and for Nixon in Nixon's later days. And he was a member. He was a member of the Vermont chapter.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's interesting because Nixon, Franklin Roosevelt, I think, had the greatest speechwriting contingent of any president, what we call murderers row. If you look at the roster, you will find people who won Emmy Awards and who wrote Pulitzers and believed in Roosevelt, believed in the New Deal, and more of the point, allowed Roosevelt to convert them while he wrote for them, so that he wrote as Roosevelt would sound and not as they would sound or write, which is really a key. But among Republicans, I would suggest that Nixon had the murderers row. His top three speechwriters were that great moderate, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, Patrick J. Buchanan. Whenever Nixon wanted to be conservative, he would call on Buchanan, and then Buchanan would go out and light the keys on the keyboard. And then he had Raymond Price, who was the former editorial page editor of the New York Tribune, Herald Tribune, who was a wonderful writer and probably Nixon's closest writer. And whenever Nixon wanted a centrist approach, he would call for the third member of the staff, William Safire, who of course was a columnist, won a Pulitzer Prize himself for the New York Daily News. And so whenever Nixon wanted to be ceremonial or be unifying, he would call on Safire, which is a wonderful way to construct your staff, because then you're not calling on them to prostitute themselves and write things that they don't believe, which
Who would
never
do
is as
that?
good as when you get the
And
truth in the president.
one other thing about Nixon is that his choice for shortstop in his all-time team was Ernie Banks.
Well, he's agreeing with the Baseball Writers of America, who chose Banks as MVP back to back. The 2 years late in the 50s, when his memory serves, they may have finished seventh both the years, or certainly seventh at least one year. A mention on Ford, and this is not to demean at all your friend, but Jerry Ford went through 22 speechwriters in about 22 months. Which I don't wish to demean him, because I think he's a fine man and just with a doctor ordered, but he had very little appreciation, as you may recall, for how to give a speech. And he thought apparently it was his writer's fault, not his, that he was a very pedestrian speaker. So he kept, or rather had his chief of staff keep firing. Ford would never fire, but he would keep dismissing speechwriters until they finally found the one. Well, they never found the one.
Amos, did you say that it was Ford who picked Ernie Banks or Nixon?
Nixon.
I thought Nixon picked Archie Vaughan, didn't he?
Well, he said Archie Vaughan was the greatest person from Arkansas. This is how minute Nixon's view of baseball was. And he thought it was just criminal that Hillary Clinton from Arkansas didn't know that Archie Vaughan was from that state. So, but no, Ford would not have been asked to choose his all-time baseball team when he was president. Someone would have had to help him. No one helped Nixon. Well, David Eisenhower consulted, but it was Nixon's, it was his son-in-law. Certainly the greatest family, whoever loved baseball, that and the Bush family, I think, in terms of, it being really part of their culture and of their field.
Point of order on Archie Vaughan. The reason why Nixon would select Vaughan as one of his favorite shortstop is because Vaughan was from Fullerton, California, and Nixon was from very close to there. So he knew about Archie Vaughan. He knew about his career. He knew everything about him. So
I'm going to
that's why he would pick him.
Well, I'm going to have to go back and check this, because I know Nixon had expressed thoughts about that. So
Didn't he also, isn't it possible, Curt, that I thought he had picked two teams.
He did.
One from like 25 to 40, and then that would then he'd have Vaughan.
Good memory. In fact, this might explain it. In 1972, he was asked by Associated Press to choose this. So he spent an entire weekend with David Eisenhower at Camp David, basically plotting who Nixon thought was the greatest American League player, the great National League team, and the greatest American League team. Then Nixon as well chose his greatest hitter of all time, obviously
Ed,
number 9. The greatest player, I think DiMaggio. Greatest pitcher, I'm not sure. I don't recall. But then, pardon me, in 1991 or 2, I think it was, Nixon was asked again by AP to, considering the last 25 years they hadn't had this, to prepare a more modernized, updated version of his all-star team. So we have that. In fact, that's presented, not to present a paid political commercial or unpaid, but we have the transcription of that, of all of the starters, all of the benchers of both teams, the 72 team and the 92 team as well, in my book, last book.
Wow.
We're at the end of the hour here. If you can stay for a while more, Curt, I'm sure people would enjoy chatting. We hit a high of 64 people at one point, which I believe is more people than will be attending the inauguration in 2 days from the general public.
Can I, Bill, can I make a suggestion if it's not?
Joanne has a presentation.
Yeah, I was going to say we'd like to hear from Joanne. She has a special. Sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute, Joanne.
Joanne's never been on mute.
You can do it. Still on mute.
Mute there.
There
All right.
you go.
Okay. Oh my God. All right. All right. This started a couple of months ago. I was just kind of, searching through, looking for some interesting baseball stories, and I got into the U.S. patent line there. And I just put in baseball. I went from 1850s up to about 1920 and around there, just looking randomly, mostly for Boston things. And I came across a rather interesting thing, that Timothy H. Murnane is actually the holder of 2 U.S. patents having to do with baseball. And the one that I decided was going to be easier to work on was that there is a Timothy Murnane bat. And if you can see here, all the way up to here. And you can look it up. I think it is patent number 448,000 if my memory serves me well, but you can just put in T.H. Murnane. Anyway, it was about 1903, and he devised this bat. It was an extra little ridge there in order to get your hands around, supposedly to make it easy to hold onto the bat when swinging it. And that was his idea. So anyway, the parameters were all there, sketched out in the patent and all. And I decided I would try to find somebody that would make me one of these bats, which was actually a lot easier than I realized. I found somebody that lives just around the corner from me, a great woodworker. And I just handed him the patent papers, page and a half, and said, gee, could you make me one of these? Well, he really did his homework. He went right back and researched it, looked it all up. All I told him was Timothy Murnane, he wrote for the Boston Globe, died in 1917 and all this sort of stuff. He came back saying, yeah, Wright and Ditson sold this bat for a few years. There were 3 different sizes, blah, blah, blah. I said, what size do you want? Do you want the small, medium, the large? And he went through the whole thing. Very meticulous. Do you want maple or do you want ash? This is ash. And he did it according completely to the parameters that were on the patent. Now, Murnane did a second patent, and it had to do with home base. And this one, I think I need to do a little bit more research on to find out, is this the first base that home base that we know today, or is it just some sort of an improvement on it? But if anybody knows what home base was like before, I think the patent date was like 1903 again. It was in about the same years. But this one was sunk into the ground and had all these nuts and bolts and everything to hold it in place and make it flat with the surface. But that one you can also look up as well if anybody is really into, home base engineering and whatnot. It might be an interesting thing to look into. But Murnane, who knew? There were quite a few other interesting people connected with baseball, either as players, owners, and whatnot, that were involved with patents that have to do with baseball. And it came up with some very interesting stories in regard to that. One of my other favorite ones that I found was by a woman, Marion Cole of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, who got a U.S. patent for a baseball game. And what I really liked about that particular one was it says, that this was assigned to Marion Cole, a spinster. And it was right in. You have to mention that she was a spinster, and I think that had to do with some legality. In other words, you can't give the money to her husband or whatever, whatever it was. But I had never seen that otherwise. But they had some interesting backstories to these patents that have to do with baseball. Not only with equipment, a lot of games, a lot of people patented games. And the backstories about these people can be very interesting. About a month or so ago, I did do a few stories on one of my Mudville dispatches, by the way, and that's how I happened to come across Murnane. Or was it really that Murnane came across me? see that I was working on this a little randomly, and came up with what I have now, a real Murnane bat.
Maybe we should have a Murnane bat made. That was great. Or Murnane bat made for every speaker.
Huh?
We could have one made for every speaker that we have.
Oh, yeah, we
So,
could, I suppose.
get your a little more business to your guy around the corner.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was quite impressed because I really didn't think that he was going to get into the research as deeply as he did. When he came back, he said, "Oh yeah, I found out that Wright and Ditson sold this, blah blah blah, and all that." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even, hey, just make me the Batman, this is good." But I do believe that this particular Murnane bat will be passed on to each and every chairman. Saul, do you think maybe you might need this for weekend play or something?
We could talk offline. That'd be great.
Yeah, negotiate.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have any more questions that were in the holding pattern for?
Well, actually, Neil just asked a question about whether home plate was another base, like first, second, and third at one point in the game.
I was wondering that too. Yeah.
Dixie, you know the answer?
I do not.
I
Looks
think
like
it
George
was,
might.
but
George Summerfeld, do you
answered.
know the answer?
I just did a quick Google search and
Yeah,
it said 1900, 1901 was the pentagonal home plate. Before that, it was square.
Okay, yeah,
I
because
have
this
one.
was a pentagonal, as we see it today and everything. But if you want to take a closer look at it, go into U.S. patents and put in Timothy H. Murnane, or just plain Murnane, and they'll all come up. And it was back around between 1900 and 1910. And I was quite impressed with the engineering on it. I'm just wondering how much effect did Murnane have on what we know as home plate today. Could be an interesting story in itself.
Peter Mancuso just said it was originally round, like a plate.
Really?
Right, yeah,
That's why it was called home plate.
yeah.
And it's so clean you could eat off it.
Until somebody
For some
kicks dirt on it.
It was round. Could I just mention, I put this on the chat, but years and years ago, probably in the 90s, Jack Carlson did an entire SABR presentation on baseball patents.
Oh, wow.
That's what I was wondering if it had been done. Yeah.
There's a whole explanation in David Nemec's official rules of baseball on Rule 105 on bases, and he gives the history of home plate and the shapes. I don't want to read it now because it's so long, but
Right.
it was shaped like a dish, and then it was shaped in shapes with a point going to the pitcher's mound, and then it was a 12-inch square. So the shapes differed over the years, but the explanation is in his rule book.
Thank you
Joanne,
for sharing that, everybody.
Joanne, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have the question that everybody wants to ask but won't. How much
Oh,
did
go.
the bat,
Oh,
how much did the bat cost?
okay. That's a good question. Yeah. The bat cost $150.
So maybe we won't be giving one to every speaker unless we can increase our coffers a little bit.
Yeah.
I have a work of art that's called a bat for screwballs, and it is a bat that is etched and screws of different sizes all up and down the bat.
Is that screwball the pitch or the person?
The artist was really cool. He thought no one would ever buy this, and I bought it in Cooperstown.
If anybody saw Tom Shiver's presentation on Spalding World Tour last week, he shows a photograph of the Chicago team or the traveling team, and one of the bats is octagonal.
Yes, yeah.
And it was something that Spalding was trying to patent, or he patented it, but trying to market it, but it didn't fly.
That's right. I did see a patent for like a flat side of a bat, but there was another bat patent actually. And the bat is actually shaped more like a question mark. Honest to God, like this. And somebody got a patent for it.
Like a pelota.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, it was all bent like that. Like almost a question mark. And I suppose, you know, we could probably do a whole presentation just on patents on bats over the years. You know, the flat-sided bats and the
there's the screwball.
octagonal.
Is that the screwball bat, Seamus? Yeah.
Yeah.
Here is the bat for screwballs.
Nice.
You can see that. See, and it goes all up and down with screws of different size from top to bottom.
That question mark bat would
Seamus,
be
that
good
guy
for-
saw you coming.
Yeah, you were gonna say the same thing as me, Bill.
I just had two.
I was gonna say like Mario Mendoza. Yeah.
I just had two requests for the artist. One was that he sign it, which he did, and the other was that he make not another one. He said, "Are you kidding me? Who would believe it?"
Curt, I have a question for Curt. Has there ever been, I do know of one instance, and that was President Obama went to Cuba with the delegation that there for an exhibition game between I want to say it was Miami maybe and the Cuban national team. I know Louis Tiant was there and shook hands with Obama and Fidel Castro's brother.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there was ever another president who did anything like that.
No, not to my knowledge. The heyday of Cuban players, you know, in terms of Washington Senators and Calvin Griffith particularly, 40s and 50s, obviously Eisenhower was not going to do that.
Yeah.
Truman was not. Roosevelt couldn't. Kennedy would never. He was very, very anti-Castro, obviously. No, I can't imagine that.
Or even just any country, not necessarily, you know, Cuba, but
Mexico.
you know, it would be neat if somebody, you know, if they ever have some of these games overseas, like they've talked about. Well, of course, they had the Red Sox Yankees series.
Yeah.
In England.
Yeah.
So
yeah. What's interesting,
the
you know,
president showed up to one of those.
yeah, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, there were a number of touring teams of Americans that played in Europe, particularly. That hadn't happened really since then either. So I guess we'll just have to wait for some kind of loosening in terms of Cuba, because that makes the most sense, but it also has the most baggage.
Should we be surprised if Biden goes to China?
Politically, I can't imagine he's a better politician than that. I would be shocked if that occurs.
Curt, to your knowledge, was there any president who played in the congressional game?
Yeah, Gerald
that would be
Ford.
held?
Jerry Ford. He was the captain of his team, the Republican team, and the reason that he this would have been he was in Congress for God knows 1946 to 1973 when he became vice president. I'm just trying to think here. He was captain of his team for many of those years, and he was the catcher. And this says a lot about Gerald Ford, both good and bad. He was petitioned to become a catcher, and he took the job because he was asked to do it, not because he wanted to do it. But he was the good sport. He was the statesman. He was the Republican anchor in that sense, but not a Republican leader, except in name. So
There's a great photo of him, I think, playing in a game where you can see him catching.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
In one of the congressional games.
yeah. He did. They had the games every year, of course, and they were, as far as I can tell, reading spirited games. That is, both teams did not take the game extraordinarily seriously. Gerald Ford, is interesting because he was at he was at Henry Aaron's. What was it? Trying to remember. Aaron had Coleman. That's right. He was at Aaron's 703rd. He did not go to Aaron's 70. He would not go to Aaron's the game in which he hit his 704th home run for the simple reason that it would draw notice of the fact that Nixon was not at the game. This was during the throes of Watergate. So Gerald Ford was, very an admirable public servant, but not particularly someone that could move America to great goals and great things, I think.
Carter was at number 715.
Which is why he lost to Jimmy Carter. That's right. Carter was there. They had a car, when Aaron hit his 715, they had a car that they gave him. Something imaginatively, the license plate, something like 715. And so Aaron's family and Carter and Mrs. Carter, I think Lillian Carter as well, was at that game. Lillian Carter, incidentally, is one of the truly unsung baseball heroines of this or any time. She was born 72 miles from Jackie Robinson. At least in part because of this, she became a great Brooklyn Dodger fan. She was on April 15, 1947, the game at Brooklyn, in which Robinson, of course, debuted. And Vin Scully was her favorite announcer, which shows great tact and great discretion in that sense. But she, neither one of the spouses are going to diminish the other quite properly. But I have to think that the reason that the Carters went to one major league ballpark after another, year after year after year, was much more her and not Mr. Carter. This is one of the great things that I found, at least in researching the presidents in the past. I had never and have never heard of a couple doing this, a family doing this, basically choosing this year, we're going to see every ballpark in baseball. It was easier, obviously, to do then with 16 and 30 teams, but still to devote, particularly since they had no air conditioning, obviously, in the 30s and 40s. And they're driving from Georgia up to Boston and Cincinnati and St. Louis and New York. Couldn't have been too comfortable, but boy, they were there. She also said, Mr. Carter, that they saw once Babe Ruth hit 2 home runs against a minor league team. She didn't say which one. So it was a family imbued with baseball. This is why it was so unfair, indeed absurd, to talk about Jimmy Carter when he was a president as not liking baseball. He was a Puritan. He didn't like anything that took him away from his work. He had no social, interest in that sense. So baseball was certainly not to be held culpable by the Carters. They loved it.
That story about Wilson, I'd never heard that, about being in the bullpen after a stroke. That's really powerful story.
The car was commissioned, the limousine that took him from the White House and later from his own house, Wilson House in Washington, to Griffith Stadium. And he did this really beginning in 1920. And he did so really almost until his death in 1925. Those cars were commandeered by Clark Griffith, the owner of the Washington Senators, and he would send a limousine to the White House or to his house very surreptitiously. No one talked about it.
Did the fans know that? The fans know that it was there?
I haven't been able to find. I don't believe so, because he was closeted in the left field bullpen. Yeah. He had Secret Service agents on both sides. I mean, you would think that a discerning fan would see. But journalists and people, I think, generally were more polite, less inquisitive, for better or for worse in those days. And he was given his privacy. He was given his privacy. It's no exaggeration to say that he certainly lengthened his life. He saved his life, I think, for 2 to 3 years. He had this terrible stroke. His wife, in effect, was commander-in-chief. therefore the 25th Amendment, and in time. And the thing that he had to live for was baseball. In the morning, he would come down. A private aide of his would come in the morning, and Wilson would come down the stairs, however he came down with his wheelchair, however, and they would go in a room, a bullpen, and they would literally pour through the Washington Post and the Washington Examiner and the many papers that the DC had at the time, and they would look at the box scores and they would talk about the games. This, without being hyperbolic, gave Woodrow Wilson a reason to live, aside from his wife, when he really had no other. He'd been humiliated. His own party had in the 1920 elections. Harding had been elected. Wilson felt that he was, enormously chastened by the American public, and he could turn to baseball. He did, year after year.
Wow. I don't know if you saw the CNN special about the 1918 pandemic, but they made the suggestion that I had not heard before that Wilson might have actually had the virus and not just the stroke, or the virus might have precipitated the stroke when he was at Versailles or something about those.
Yeah, well, there has been, I don't know how you prove it conclusively one way or the other. The virus seems to have preceded the stroke. Obviously, whether it causes it, whether it's dissimilar, or whether it's aligned, we don't know. But if you look at photos of Wilson, he declined precipitously in the last two and a half years of his presidency. And I do think that his travels abroad really brought that on. You couldn't take a jet. You had to go by ocean liner. It was cumbersome. It took forever. It jounced. You felt every bounce up of it. And I don't see how it could not have hastened his death.
Just adding one thing about Woodrow Wilson. John Thorne wrote an excellent essay about Wilson in Our Game, which he has online. And I just looked it up. I kind of remember reading it some time back. Woodrow Wilson, the first fantasy baseball player, which goes back to the 1870s. So you may want to look that up. It's a great read. I remember being surprised by it when I read it.
Interesting.
That might have had something to do with those diagrams he was drawing in his notebooks, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly the case.
Yeah.
When he was in school, not simply college, but high school, prep school before then.
Wow. Quite a subject. We could go on all night, I'm sure.
I know, duty calls, more or less.
You want to close us up? First of all, thanks again to Curt for a great night.
Yes.
My pleasure. This has been a blast. It really has. I thank you. Yes.
You want to close up shop, Bill?
Yeah, I think we'll just end. And we've still got 39 people that here after almost an hour and a half. A really good discussion afterwards.
Buttons for punishment, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Curt.
No, I mean,
he's referring to me, not
we'll schedule another meeting before too long, maybe in the next month or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we'll get Joe Castiglione for a session.
You should. I mean, I didn't say it simply because he's here, and I don't know whether he still is or not. But he was not facing a happy future when he was named the voice of the Red Sox. As you'll remember, in 1983, John Miller had just gone to Baltimore. A lot of people blamed the Red Sox for Miller leaving the Sox. Ned Martin had gone several years before from radio, of which he was a master, to television, of which he was not a master. Didn't like it, would freely talk about his distaste and the superficiality of TV. But he was magnificent on radio. So here comes Joe C. And in effect, he is unfairly judged by too many Red Sox fans as having replaced both Miller and Martin. Good luck. Mel Allen, Vin Scully, and Harry Carey combined could not have met that successfully, but Joe did. In fact, Ralph Houck, who was then the Red Sox manager, was enormously encouraging to Joe when Joe found it difficult to believe that he would be rehired. He thought he was going to be fired, and Houck came to his defense. And Joe's a wonderful person, as you know, great broadcaster. Why he was in Cooperstown, Martin, Coleman, Jim Woods should be in Cooperstown. We're handicapped by the fact that we can induct only one broadcaster a year.
Well, you know, a great thing about Joe also is I know firsthand all the great work that he's done for the Jimmy Fund, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. So
yes,
I mean, if you bring that into the equation, and of course, Curt Gowdy was a big part of that tradition, and it went down to Ken Coleman and then to Joe Castiglione. They've all been great friends of Dana-Farber.
No question about it, no question. And that's been one of the strains of continuity, which at least to me makes the Red Sox the Red Sox. You know, there's really no, and I hope this has not been irretrievably warped by present ownership, but the mom and pop, the feeling of family that the Red Sox once had, and that Joe understands, I think, and Joe embodies so well, both in his own life and in how he conducts himself. But boy, the Red Sox lose that, and they're not the Red Sox. Any team can be a corporate model, you know. What separated the Red Sox was for so long that they weren't. And I like to think that at least in someday, some of the voices that I've talked about will be inducted at Cooperstown.
There are still great people with the team.
I'm not saying
in the front office. Yeah,
I'm not saying there aren't. I'm simply, and we live in a different era for sure. But you know, the Red Sox feeling of Gowdy, Williams, and was really quite precious. I mean, I know when I mentioned my mother and my father, they brought me here to Worcester, and as a reward, we got our great chance to see Dr. Strangelove and Pumpsy Green and Don Budden. Talk about gluttonous. And so in any event, but one of the things that impressed me, the first time that I went to Fenway, or at least to Boston, I don't think we went to Fenway, it was 1960, and I was just a kid. But what impressed me was that wherever we drove, Red Sox baseball would be on. Be on in traffic, and be on at ice cream places, be on at restaurants. And Curt Gowdy, of course, is then the Red Sox announcer. And that's not true with every franchise either, that great feeling of the allegiance toward a team that this region has. So.
Well,
that isn't true of any franchise, actually, I would think, Curt.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Well, maybe we can get it back. We got a guy like Theo Epstein coming up with new ideas.
Yeah.
To save baseball. I'm really hoping that.
I'll tell you one that won't save it is having in this tie game a runner on second base to begin an inning. When I heard that, I knew that baseball really lacked a commissioner who had baseball in his soul. And that, of course, has been verified. This is me just talking, and many of you may differ. I don't know. But the game really, I think, needs to move decisively to make games shorter, to make camera angles better, to do things that it can do and should do because they're all within baseball's province. But it doesn't have a great deal of time because I see teaching at the University of Rochester, and I hate it. But 10 years ago, I could get a debate started in upstate New York. I mean, baseball country, right? The Hall of Fame. And between fans, students who are the Yankees, students who love the Red Sox, I can't even do that now. I mean, they simply don't have an interest in baseball. And I think baseball ownership should really focus upon that. Everything is not dollars and cents. Long-term interest is dollars and cents, and baseball should keep that in mind, I think.
I guess I would look at it as, you know, baseball is in some respects, if they're comparing like their television, now 2020 was an odd year, obviously, and 2021 will probably be an odd year, but they're comparing their television ratings to the NFL. and to the NBA when the NBA, is having a normal season.
Right. But I
Those
mean-
sports, I'm sorry, Kurt.
No, that's okay. You go right ahead. I interrupted. I'm sorry.
Those sports are fast-paced sports. And I think if it's important, if you think it's important to
Yeah.
bring young people into the game, then the pace of the game, I think is important.
I think it's important in the sense that if you watch any video or watch the Baseball Network or watch any video, let's say, real live action baseball from 1952, from 1953, as I'm sure many of you have and I have. But games are not 3 hours and 15 minutes long. They're 2 hours and 15, and they're 2 minutes and hours and 20.
Yeah.
And it's not simply because of between innings commercials. When someone cites that to me, it's saying that they're being disingenuous or that they simply don't know what they're talking about. Because the real difference in time has come from how baseball is played. And if you go back to 1952, Yankees, Dodgers, Allen and Barber doing the game, but the game lasts 2 hours and 15 minutes. Why? Because Vic Raschi gets the ball, he throws it. P.B. Reese either swings or doesn't swing, or sometimes he takes a pitch, but he doesn't step out of the batter's box. And this is where the pitch, I mean, when you're talking hundreds of pitches, as you are in any big league game, even a pitcher's duel, that is where the real difference in time comes. And what is frustrating is that the rule changes, which could take, in my view, if you look, at the historical evidence, half an hour off the average of an average game. Is simply you enforce rules already on the books, and these 3 rules are on the books, and that is that you make the pitcher throw the ball within 20 seconds with no runner on base. That's on the books, but it's not supported. The second thing is you don't let the batter step out unless he has the approval of the umpires. Well, a commissioner should and could very easily work with umpires to make sure that that approval is denied. And the third thing is you call the high strike zone so you don't have as many batters going 3 and 2, because very few proportionally hitters back in the 20s and 30s, particularly as you watch TV games from the early 50s, went to 3 and 2. You do those things, these 3 things. And Rob Manfred has those things. He doesn't have to make the law up. All he has to do is enforce it. And that would go a long way toward restoring, I think, baseball interest among the young. Polls from I'm doing a book right now for the Hall of Fame on baseball broadcasting and doing research. Boy, if you look at polling data, I mean, in 1964, baseball led football like 48-14 in a Harris poll. 7% of people in America now say that they are baseball fans, or 9% rather. Soccer is at 7%, and I'm sure we'll have passed it within the next 10 years. And baseball's prime audience is us. Well, we won't be here 20 years from now. At least some of us won't be here, and students in college will be. So the question is, without wrecking the chemistry and the nuance and the fluency of how baseball is played, how do you restore baseball to what it was? When games were 2 hours and 15
We
minutes.
get kids playing it in the city.
That
as
would
part
help.
of it.
But,
an
not simply-
RBI program,
Well, that's
felt
true,
good.
and I agree with that. But if you look demographically at polls taken by Lou Harris and George Gallup and John Zogby, baseball's true crumbling of support has been among the white middle class. They're playing every sport except for baseball. That's where the plummet has come. There's no argument between who, or should be, between no groups to go after. You go after all of them.
Yeah.
Because the fall has been steep and all.
There's no such thing as a pickup game anymore.
Pardon me?
There's no such thing as a pickup game. Doesn't exist.
No one lives like that anymore.
Yeah, no one does. Yeah, sadly.
In the late night games, I saw somebody put it up on note, games starting at 9 o'clock, in the World Series. it'd be great to have some day games in the World Series again. I mean, football, they're all day games and everyone gets excited.
It would be wonderful, but why is baseball in essence selling its soul? It's because the ratings, and more to the point, the amount the networks can charge advertisers per minute is far higher in prime time than among afternoon games. The ratings.
If nobody's watching the games. I mean,
nobody's watching the game, so it really doesn't matter, does it? I mean, the ratings
advertisers should know that. Yeah.
for last year's World Series were an atrocity.
Yeah.
World Series included with the Dodgers. So, you can't say that, it's lovely that the Red Sox are a healthy franchise, but many fans are Red Sox fans and not baseball fans. We need some fans in America who love the game and who are incidentally a Yankee fan or a Brave fan or a Red Sox fan or a Tampa Bay fan. I mean, the NFL has, because of television, fans of teams of Tampa Bay and Arizona and places you and I, with luck, will never venture. But that's not true with baseball. And baseball needs to revert. And it used not to be true when all of us were kids.
You know, when they
Everyone
played the
knew
first
every line,
World
everyone knew
Series,
every lineup. Yeah.
when they played the first World Series game at night, it was great in 1971. Blaming the night games on kids not being able to watch the game. I don't get that, because I was usually in school, and they'd start the thing midweek, and so you'd get 2 weekend games so you could watch it. But it's the length of the games. You put it at night, and you're trying to span 4 time zones, and then they go 4 hours. That's pretty
the
tough.
last couple of Red Sox World Series, 4 hours and a half, 5 hours against the Dodgers. Admittedly, they were extra innings, but there's no way that a nation as fast throb as America is going to sit through 5 hours of what baseball has become.
Any Red Sox Yankees regular season game was like 4.5 hours long until a couple of years ago. It was,
only a commissioner can change that, and baseball lacks such a person.
You need the cooperation of the players. Curt, you're absolutely right that cutting down the time between pitches is going to make a big difference. And they have pitch clocks. My wife does a pitch clock at Target Field, but it still hasn't been enforced. And that's something they need the buy-in from the players because the players can resist it and just not make it work too.
Yeah, but Manfred, who's afraid of his own shadow in many ways, says that he won't act unilaterally in any sense to bring about what we want, and unless he gets compliance with and the approval of the players' union. Now, Bowie Kuhn never said that. Uberoth never said that. Giamatti never said that. The time he had Faye Vincent didn't. This guy is not.
Did the players union want the ghost runners?
No, I don't know. No, and that's not making a difference on the game, but just to not
it is
fuss and
a change
argue
in the
over a pitch clock, which is not just a pitch clock, it's a pitch and batter clock. You're absolutely right. The minor league rule is you can't step out. If you swing and miss at a pitch and fall on your ass, okay, that's one thing. You look at a pitch down the middle and take 5 steps out. But the players still, if they're going to resist that, no matter what you do with enforcement, it's going to be troublesome.
We'll find another sport, because if baseball can't bring itself to make the rules and to enforce the rules which might make the difference between a healthy survival and not surviving at all. I mean, my goodness, if he's going to let, if the commissionership is going to wait for the players to comply and have that kind of a working partnership, we'll be seeking the 12th of never before that occurs.
Well, it could be a bargaining chip in the next agreement too. If the players are going to say, "Yeah, we'll go along with it," that's going to be part of that.
But
don't fear him. Unless you fear your opposite number one, and no one can tell me with a straight face that the players' union fears Rob Manfred.
But let's face it, baseball ownership tries to destroy the union since the day it was born. The bottom line is, Hollywood doesn't make 4-hour movies anymore either.
Right.
If they can't get this product down to a more manageable size, it's going to die.
I think one of the reasons that you can shorten the game is to remove the winning pitcher stat. So all he does is throw. It doesn't matter. And if you did that, you would eliminate a whole bunch of arcane stuff about should I do this, should I do that?
I don't know about that. Although just from a statistical standpoint, I'd say you
Far
could get rid
more-
of wins and losses for
Yeah,
pitchers.
that's
And
far more dramatic than simply enforce. You and I, if we were commissioner, could literally and bring about the enforcement of some of these rules.
Oh, yeah.
Three rules.
Yep.
Three rules.
I miss pitchers that pitch 7, 8, 9 innings. I'm a dinosaur. I miss that. I miss when 30 home runs meant something. I don't care about exit velocity. I mean, and I'm one of the younger guys on the call, but I like when a guy won 18, 19, 20 games.
I don't either. And let me ask you this, because we're both on the same page here precisely. When was baseball more popular? When you talk about 30 wins and 400 homers, and when
Louis Tiant has said this to me a million times. Louis Tiant always says the same thing. If you tell a guy he's throwing 100 pitches, if he's not keeping track, he might not know. Let him go 120, 130. He's probably still pitching well. I mean, who made these rules? Okay, the computer. Does the computer have a heart? Does the computer have a brain?
It's not
It does have a brain.
that baseball has suffered a severe plunge in popularity since the onset of analytics. Tell me 5 kids that you know, ages, let's say 8 to 10 years old, that fell in love with baseball because of analytics. We fell in love with baseball because, let's say, a Ned Martin or a Curt Gowdy, and the poetry that they had, or the poetry of Fenway Park, or maybe we like the stability of some of the veterans before free agency. But the point is, particularly since launch velocity, the average person doesn't know what that means. They don't know what more means. We know, the average person doesn't know, and they don't care.
So
what are you going to do? Tell a general manager to not do the best interest of winning?
No, don't do that. But
That's
as I
up to the
said, unless
business side of it.
You've got the foundation of a healthy game, and the foundation of a healthy game is a game between 2 and 2.5 hours, where the hitter once in a while actually hits the ball for something other than a home run, or else then strikes out. When's the last game that you saw hitters? Oh, that's right. There's no action here, or very little compared to when we were young. This is not the same game.
So here's
I were raised.
So here's the thing. I hear you, Stu, and I agree with you. You tell the general manager, tell the manager, you have to win the game, and you have these numbers. But I must be a Luddite here. I'm 65. I'm a dinosaur. But I will tell you that the lure of a pitcher, like for me, in 1972, watching Steve Carlton win 27 games, the lure of that, I think
40%, right? Of his
45% of the wins.
Yeah, the victory.
I think there's something there. I
I'm not saying there's
feel
not.
that there's something there, Stu.
I mean, kids,
Of
yes.
course
they
there
have
is
their
something there,
stupid
Mark.
video
You can't tell
appliances.
the general managers not to do what's in the
The genie's
best
out of the
interest
bottle,
winning.
right?
The essence of the game,
Exactly.
the
That's what it
allure of the
is.
game is what matters, whether it works or not.
Yeah, for the business side of it, but
You
not
know,
for the
it's like
baseball
saying, well,
operation side.
My timepiece is wonderful. Well, does it work? No, but it's still wonderful because it's so glitzy and can do so many things. The essence of baseball, as it's now constructed, is broken. And unless that's changed, and that has everything to do with the pace, everything to do with when the pitcher throws the ball, under what circumstance, that, if any, that the hitter swings, unless that's fixed, and it can be fixed so easily. That's the
Not
point.
by telling general managers not to follow a winning strategy,
But
but
what
I
if you
agree with the
change-
other things to increase the pace of the game and do things that way. But
You can do
you
it,
know,
yeah.
what Saul says, the genie is out of the bottle. You're not
Okay.
sticking that one back in. The knowledge is there, and they're not going to go
All
against
right,
it.
I'm
I
not
wouldn't either.
criticizing analytics per se, but when analytics becomes your substitute for the essence of the game, then you've got a problem. And with too many clubs, it has. I'm not really
Clubs that are
blaming them. I
pursuing
don't
winning.
blame you. If I were a GM, I'd do whatever I had to win. My job, you know, my security is on the platter. But Bowie Kuhn, who had basically an amendment that he concocted made it out of thin air, but when it was to act in the best interest of the game. Didn't exist before he was commissioner. He utilized it.
No.
And here you've got, again, I get back,
Well, we do have to all remember that baseball is in the entertainment business.
it is.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar operation. It certainly wasn't when we all first were introduced to it. And if in the entertainment industry, you have to attract viewers, customers, advertisers, sponsors. If the product, I find my big issue is there aren't enough balls in play. And I think that is adding to, from an aesthetic standpoint, I'd much rather watch a triple than a home run any day.
Me too.
Terrific athletes.
Me too.
We have
Well,
great athletes, and we don't get to see them perform.
Well, of course,
don't
more
get to see
balls in
them
play,
run.
it's better. But tell that to Chris Taylor, who was a nothing ball player, a replacement level player, who learned about from analytics, modifying the swing and the launch angle, and has become a regular and a pretty good
They
player.
learned, but what about the baseball fan? Baseball has evolved into a sport of you pitch the ball, maybe the hitter swings at it. If he doesn't, he takes it. And then he
It's
hits
up to the
home
rule
run.
makers to fix, because you
Well,
can't tell a
somebody-
player like Chris Taylor or Justin
fine.
Turner,
The rule makers-
just go back to the minor leagues rather than become an effective but boring player.
Yeah,
How
he's
about
just
that?
I'm not blaming him. I'm blaming the rule makers, but they're under the aegis of the commissioner.
Well, the rule makers do have, the commissioner cannot change the rules unilaterally. Any rule change has to be approved by the Players Association, so
Well-
they do have to work with the players.
Right.
But they
How
can
about
be
deadening, how
enforced.
about
We'll
deadening the
meet
ball?
a year from now and talk about how nothing has happened. Because it
Probably won't,
won't.
but it
Well,
is
the
up to the rule
Why have a
makers.
commissioner then?
Honestly, I would love to see Theo as commissioner, because I think somebody who is, a little younger than us, but in our wheelhouse, remembers those days,
Yeah.
and he's a bright guy. I mean, somebody from that generation who doesn't disdain the new stats, because Stu's right. I mean, that's where it's at.
I don't
And
know
that
if it
is
makes
how
any
guys like,
difference who the commissioner is.
Turner can make it.
I agree.
But
I don't think it matters who the commissioner is.
Let's not kid ourselves. The commissioner is not independent.
How about deadening the ball?
Yeah.
Could
Well,
work. Chuck
we've had
Hildebrand is an
effective
advocate of that.
commissioners, we've had indolent commissioners.
I've seen people recommend moving the mound back and deadening the ball.
Well, these are the things they tried in the Atlantic League, and even
That's
with
pretty good.
experimenting, it's hard to figure out because you're going to get other consequences. It's not an easy thing to go fix, but they are looking at it at any rate. I think they are trying in some ways.
They've been looking at it for years and years and years.
we need those Charlie Finley orange baseballs.
Yeah, that'll work.
It doesn't help
Actually,
the
it's-
hit of baseball.
I
It's
kind of like the
120 years
trash
they've been
can
looking at it.
myself.
We could have a whole nother meeting about this.
That's true.
I gotta go,
Right,
folks.
right.
Yeah, we should call this one. But thanks
Right.
again, everybody. And we'll be in touch real soon for our next meeting. Stay safe.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
Night.